As soon as my husband found out he was going to receive an inheritance, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Pack your bags. I am rich now." He threw divorce papers on the coffee table next to a bottle of champagne that cost more than our car payment. I calmly picked up the pen and signed. He thought he was cutting me out of his fortune, but the moment the notary read the will, 3 days later, he fell to his knees in front of me sobbing. What he did not know was that I had been the one pulling the strings the entire time. Before I tell you how I destroyed his ego and his bank account in one afternoon, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to humble a man who forgot who really held the crown. My name is Keisha and I am 34 years old living in Atlanta. For the last 5 years I have been playing a role. To my husband Darnell and his overbearing family, I was just a boring administrative assistant who clipped coupons and nagged about the electric bill. They thought I was cheap. They thought I was simple. What they did not know was that I am actually a forensic accountant working remotely for some of the biggest firms in the country. I spend my days hunting down hidden assets and exposing corporate fraud. I know how to find money, and I definitely know how to make it disappear. But in my own home, I kept my mouth shut and paid the bills while Darnell pretended he was the king of the castle. It was a Tuesday evening when the facade finally cracked. I had just pulled into the driveway of our rented townhouse in Buckhead after a grueling day of auditing a tech startup. I was tired. My head was pounding, and all I wanted was a hot bath and silence. Instead, I saw my clothes raining down from the second-floor window. My vintage silk blouses, my heavy winter coats, my underwear, all of it landing in the wet grass and dirt of the front lawn. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. For a split second, I thought we were being evicted. Darnell was terrible with money. He managed a sneaker store at the mall, but spent like he was a rapper with a platinum record. I was always the one cleaning up his financial messes, paying off his secret credit cards, and smoothing things over with landlords. I got out of the car and walked up the driveway, stepping over my favorite red dress, which was now muddy and ruined. The front door was wide open. Rap music was blasting from inside, shaking the windows. I walked into the living room and froze. Darnell was standing on the coffee table, popping the cork on a bottle of Cristal. He was wearing his best suit, the one I had bought him for his sister's wedding, and he looked manic. His eyes were wide and wild, and he was sweating through his shirt. "Finally, you are home," he shouted, raising the bottle in a toast to himself. "I was wondering when you would show up to collect your garbage." "Darnell, what is going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my insides were shaking. "Why are my clothes on the lawn?" "Because you do not live here anymore, Keisha," he said, hopping down from the table. He took a long swig of the expensive champagne straight from the bottle foam dripping down his chin. "I am upgrading my life, and that starts with getting rid of dead weight." I looked around the room. There were boxes everywhere, but they were not packed. They were empty. He had just dumped my things out of them to clear space. On the TV screen, a Zillow listing for a $3 million mansion in the Cascades was paused. "You are drunk," I said, reaching for my purse. "I am going to stay at a hotel until you sober up." "I am not drunk. I am rich," he roared, laughing like a villain in a bad movie. "I just got the call an hour ago. Aunt Hattie died." My stomach dropped. Aunt Hattie was Darnell's great-aunt. She was the only person in his family I actually respected. She was stern and private, and she had always been kind to me in her own sharp-tongued way. She had been sick for a long time, but hearing she was gone felt like a physical blow. "Hattie passed away," I whispered. "And this is how you react. You are celebrating." She was 90 years old. "Keisha, people die. Get over it," he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "The important part is that her lawyer called me." I am the only living male heir, the only one left with the family name. She had millions, Keisha, millions. And it is all mine. I stared at him. I knew Hattie had money. I knew it better than anyone because I was the one who had helped her recover a massive sum from a dishonest business partner 3 years ago, a fact Darnell knew nothing about. But seeing him dance on her grave before her body was even cold made me nauseous. So because you think you are getting an inheritance, you are kicking me out? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous chill. I am not thinking I am getting it. It is a done deal. And yes, I am kicking you out. He walked over to the side table and picked up a stack of papers, throwing them at my chest. They fluttered to the floor between us. I downloaded these from a legal website, he said, smirking. Divorce papers, uncontested. You sign these, you agree to leave with what you came with, which is nothing. You waive all rights to my future assets. You waive alimony. You get out of my face and let me live the life I deserve. I looked down at the papers. He had filled them out in sloppy handwriting using a blue Sharpie. It was insulting. It was pathetic. And it was the most dangerous mistake he had ever made. Darnell, listen to me, I said, looking him dead in the eye. We have been married for 5 years. I have paid the rent. I have paid for the car you drive. I have paid your student loans. You really want to do this. You want to end us right now because you think money is coming. I do not think Keisha, I know. And I do not need a wife who nags me about saving $5 on groceries when I am about to be buying Ferraris. You are a placeholder, a convenience. But now I can afford the kind of woman I really want. Someone with class. Someone who knows how to spend money, not just hoard it. The insult stung, but it also clarified everything. There was no love here, there never had been, just usage. He had used me to survive, and now that he thought he had a winning lottery ticket, he was discarding me like a used tissue. I bent down and picked up the papers. I read through the terms. He had checked every box that stripped me of rights. He wanted a clean break. No division of property, no spousal support, just an immediate dissolution of the marriage effective upon the judge's signature. You are sure about this? I asked one last time, giving him a final chance to be a human being. You are absolutely sure you want to divorce me right now, this second, before the will is even officially read? He laughed, a cruel barking sound. Are you deaf? Yes, I am sure. I do not want you getting a single dime of Hattie's money. If we are still married, when that check clears, you might try to claim half. My lawyer friend told me that. So sign the papers, Keisha. Sign them, or I will throw the rest of your cheap clothes into the street. I looked at him. I saw the greed in his eyes. I saw the weakness in his jaw. And I saw the absolute certainty that he had won. I walked over to the kitchen counter where a pen was sitting next to his car keys. I picked it up. My hand did not shake. My heart did not race. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a predator who realizes the prey has just walked into the trap. Okay, Darnell, I said softly. If this is what you want. I signed my name on the dotted line. The ink was dark and permanent. I dated it. I turned the page and signed again. He snatched the papers from under my hand as soon as I lifted the pen. Done, he crowed, checking the signature. Finally! You are out. You are history. Now get your stuff and get out of my house. I have people coming over to celebrate, and I do not want you depressing the vibe. I walked to the door, stepping over the mess he had made. I did not look back at the photos of our wedding on the mantel. I did not look at the couch we had bought together. I walked out onto the lawn and started gathering my clothes into a pile. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was watching from her porch, her hand over her mouth. I offered her a tight smile. I gathered what I could carry, leaving the rest in the dirt. I walked to my car, a sensible sedan that I had bought and paid for in cash, and tossed my armful of silk and wool into the back seat. Darnell stood in the doorway watching me leave, sipping his champagne. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. Don't come back begging when you see me in a Bentley, he shouted. I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. I rolled down the window and looked at him one last time. Don't worry, Darnell. I said, my voice carrying across the quiet lawn. I won't be begging. But you might want to save that champagne cork. It might be the only valuable thing you own by the end of the week. I backed out of the driveway, leaving him laughing on the porch. I drove 2 blocks before I pulled over into a church parking lot. My hands were finally shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. But I wasn't crying. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Mr. Henderson. He was Aunt Hattie's personal attorney and the executor of her estate. He was also an old friend of mine, someone Darnell had never bothered to meet because he thought lawyers were boring. I pressed call. It rang twice. Keisha, Mr. Henderson's voice was warm and grave. I am so sorry about Hattie. I was just about to call you. I know Arthur, I said, cutting him off. Darnell just told me. He also just forced me to sign divorce papers. He thinks he is the sole heir. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then a deep sigh. He kicked you out, didn't he? Yes. And he signed a waiver of all marital assets. He wants everything kept separate. He was very specific about it. Arthur chuckled, a dry, dusty sound. That boy always was a fool. Does he know about the codicil Hattie added last year? No, I said, a small smile touching my lips for the first time that night. He has no idea. Good, Arthur said. The reading is scheduled for Friday morning at 9. I will make sure the security team is present. You stay safe, Keisha. And keep those divorce papers safe. They are more valuable than gold right now. I hung up the phone and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My hair was a mess. My makeup was smudged. I looked like a woman who had just lost everything. But as I put the car in drive and headed toward the downtown Ritz-Carlton, I knew the truth. Darnell had just played himself, and I was going to enjoy every single second of his downfall. I had barely finished gathering the first armful of my clothes from the damp grass when a beat-up Honda Civic screeched into the driveway, blocking my exit. The passenger door flew open before the car even came to a full stop, and out stepped my mother-in-law, Mama Louise, clutching her oversized purse like a weapon. Behind the wheel was my sister-in-law Tasha, popping gum, and looking at my misery with the same excitement most people reserve for a reality TV finale. They had arrived not to help, not to mediate, but to pick the carcass clean. Mama Louise marched up the driveway in her Sunday church shoes, stepping right on the sleeve of my beige trench coat without even looking down. She didn't ask why my belongings were on the lawn. She didn't ask if her son had lost his mind. She just looked at me with a sneer that wrinkled her heavily powdered nose. Well, look at this, she said, her voice loud enough for the neighbors 3 doors down to hear. The Lord works in mysterious ways, but sometimes he just takes out the trash for you. I always told Darnell you were bad luck, Keisha. Ever since you married him, his spirit has been dim. Now that he is coming into his blessing, it is only right that you are moving on to wherever it is people like you go. I didn't say a word. I just bent down to pick up my coat, wiping the mud from the fabric. I knew better than to argue with Louise. She was a woman who used scripture to justify her cruelty and hid her greed behind a wall of false piety. Tasha didn't even bother with a greeting. She bypassed me entirely and went straight for a box of my handbags that Darnell had kicked over near the porch. Her eyes lit up as she spotted a designer tote I had treated myself to after a particularly grueling audit last year. "Ooh, Darnell," she squealed, holding it up. "You throwing this out too, because if Keisha doesn't have a receipt, I am claiming salvage rights. This would go perfect with my birthday outfit." "Put it down, Tasha," I said, my voice low and cold. "That is mine." Mama Louise stepped between us, blocking my path to her daughter. She poked a manicured finger into my chest. "You don't give orders here anymore," she snapped. "Everything in this house and everything on this property belongs to my son now. That includes the bags, the jewelry, and whatever else he paid for while you were pretending to be a wife. You should be grateful he isn't charging you for the years you lived off his potential." Lived off his potential. The phrase almost made me laugh. I was the one who had balanced his checkbook every month so he wouldn't overdraft. I was the one who quietly paid off his gambling debts 2 years ago, so Mama Louise wouldn't find out her perfect angel had a problem, but to them, I was just the obstacle. You know, Mama Louise, I said, staring her down. Darnell didn't buy that bag. I did. Just like I bought the groceries you ate every Sunday and the gas for the car you borrowed last week, she scoffed, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. Lies and slander. My son is a manager. He is a provider. And now he is an heir. Aunt Hattie knew what she was doing, leaving everything to him. She knew he was the only one with the vision to carry on the family legacy. She hated you, Keisha. She told me so herself, said you were cold, said you were calculating. She held on to her money tight because she knew you were just waiting to get your claws into it. The accusation burned hotter than the shame of being evicted. Aunt Hattie hadn't hated me. She was just a woman who had been used by her family for so long that she had built walls of ice around her heart. I was the only one who climbed over them. For the last 6 months of her life, while Darnell was too busy chasing trends and Mama Louise was too busy with her church choir, I was the one sitting by Hattie's bedside. I was the one wiping her brow, holding her hand and listening to her regrets. I was the one who discovered her former business manager had been siphoning funds from her accounts, and I was the one who used my forensic skills to track it down and get it back, every single penny. Hattie didn't hate me, she trusted me. But I couldn't tell them that, not yet. Before I could respond, another car pulled up. A leased BMW that I knew for a fact was 2 payments behind. Brad, Tasha's husband, stepped out. He was a white man who tried too hard to fit into Darnell's world, wearing streetwear that cost too much and fit too poorly. He worked as a real estate agent, but mostly he just surfed Zillow and talked about deals that never closed. He walked up the driveway with a fake sympathetic smile plastered on his face, avoiding my eyes completely. He went straight to the front door where Darnell was still standing, bottle in hand, watching the show. "Darnell," my brother Brad said, clapping him on the back. "I heard the news. Incredible, man. Truly incredible. Listen, I was just looking at the market trends and we need to move fast. This house, it is dead weight." Darnell nodded eagerly, swayed by anyone who used buzzwords. "You think so, Brad?" "Absolutely." Brad continued, pulling out his phone to show Darnell some graph. "We sell this place immediately. Cash out the equity. I have a friend developing a metaverse real estate project, virtual land, Darnell. That is the future. You take Hattie's inheritance, you combine it with the house equity, and you get in on the ground floor. We are talking 10 times returns in 6 months. You will be a billionaire, not just a millionaire." I watched them, feeling a mix of disgust and pity. Brad was a shark sensing blood in the water, and Darnell was too blinded by his own ego to see he was being played. Selling the house. The house I had found, the house I had negotiated the mortgage for because Darnell's credit score was in the trash. "You can't sell the house, Darnell," I said, stepping forward. "Your name isn't the only one on the deed." Mama Louise turned on me, her eyes flashing. "Oh, hush up, girl. You signed those divorce papers, didn't you? You waived your rights. Darnell, tell her." Darnell puffed out his chest, empowered by his mother and his yes-man brother-in-law. "She signed them, Mama. She gave up everything. She walked away." "Then she needs to keep walking," Mama Louise declared. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You heard him? You are trespassing. Get your rags and get off my son's property before we call the police." Tasha laughed, kicking a box of my books toward the street. "Yeah, Keisha, go find another sponsor. This bank is closed." Brad finally looked at me, his expression dripping with condescension. "Look, Keisha, it is better this way. Darnell needs space to manage his new empire. You just don't fit into this tax bracket anymore. Why don't you go stay with a friend? Let the men handle the business." The men. One man who managed a sneaker store and another who sold imaginary land. It was a joke, a cruel, expensive joke. I pulled my arm from Mama Louise's grasp. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I looked at each of them, etching this moment into my memory. Darnell, arrogant and drunk on potential wealth. Mama Louise, vindictive and blind to her son's incompetence. Tasha, petty and thieving. And Brad, the opportunistic parasite. Fine, I said, smoothing my shirt. I am leaving. Enjoy the champagne, Darnell. And Brad, good luck with the virtual land. I am sure it is just as real as your real estate license. I bent down and picked up the last box I could carry. I didn't try to save the rest. Let them have the old clothes. Let them pick through the remnants of the woman they thought I was. I walked to my car, the sound of their laughter and Tasha's excitement over my stolen purse following me down the driveway. I loaded the box into the passenger seat and climbed in. I locked the doors, shutting out their noise. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of my own freedom. It smelled like rain and cold air. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady now. I dialed a number I knew by heart but had never saved in my contacts list just in case Darnell went snooping. It rang once. Mr. Henderson. I said, my voice clear and sharp, cutting through the silence of the car. Keisha, are you safe? The lawyer asked, his voice filled with concern. I am safe, I replied, watching in the rearview mirror as Darnell high-fived Brad on the porch. They have taken the bait. All of them. Darnell signed the waiver. Mama Louise is already counting the money, and Brad is convincing him to liquidate everything. Excellent, Mr. Henderson said. I have the documents ready. The reading is set. Good, I said, starting the engine. Don't go easy on them, Arthur. I want them to feel every single decimal point. Consider the plan activated, Keisha, he said. I will see you on Friday. I hung up and put the car in drive. As I pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the house that was no longer my home. I looked forward to the Ritz-Carlton, to a warm bath, and to the absolute devastation I was about to unleash on the vultures who thought they had picked me clean. They had no idea I was the one holding the knife. The valet at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Atlanta opened my car door with a familiarity that would have shocked my husband. Welcome back, Miss Vance, he said smoothly, accepting my keys. I tipped him $100 bill and walked through the revolving doors into the air-conditioned lobby. The scent of white tea and expensive leather hit me instantly, washing away the smell of the damp lawn and Darnell's cheap cologne. Here I wasn't Keisha, the nagging wife who clipped coupons. Here I was, Ms. Vance, the forensic accountant, who had saved Fortune 500 companies from bankruptcy. I checked into the presidential suite, a room I usually reserved for high-stakes corporate audits, but tonight it was my sanctuary. I took a long, hot shower, scrubbing the mud from my ankles and the memory of my mother-in-law's sneer from my mind. I wrapped myself in a plush white robe, poured a glass of Pinot Noir, and sat down at the heavy oak desk overlooking the city skyline. I opened my laptop. It was time to go to work. Darnell was a creature of habit, and his worst habit was laziness. We had installed a high-end security system in the house 3 years ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I had set up the master account, but I had given Darnell the login credentials so he could feel like the protector of the house. I knew for a fact he had never changed the password from the factory default I had reset it to, which was his own birthday. I typed in the date, and the screen flickered to life. A grid of 6 camera feeds appeared covering the living room, the kitchen, the driveway, and the backyard. It was like watching a reality show where the stars were the most ignorant people on earth. The party was in full swing. Darnell had moved the celebration from the front porch to the living room. He was pacing back and forth, the phone pressed to his ear, his other hand gesturing wildly. I turned up the volume on my laptop. Yeah, man, I am telling you, it is a done deal, he was shouting. Aunt Hattie left it all to me. The house, the stocks, the accounts. I am a multi-millionaire. Yeah, she is gone. I kicked her out tonight, sent her packing with her Goodwill clothes. He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. Then he laughed, that loud, arrogant laugh that used to grate on my nerves but now just sounded pathetic. No, man, I need it now. I am looking at the G-Wagon. Matte black. Custom rims. Yeah, I want the lease approved tonight. I don't care about the interest rate. Put it at 30% for all I care. I will pay it off in cash next week. I watched as he agreed to a predatory auto loan over the phone, signing his financial death warrant for a car he couldn't afford to put gas in. Brad was sitting on my good velvet sofa, his feet up on the coffee table, scrolling through his tablet. "Get the fully loaded one," Darnell Brad shouted. "We need to roll up to the closing table in style." Darnell hung up the phone and high-fived Brad. "It is done. They are delivering it tomorrow morning. I am going to park it right where Keisha's hoopty used to sit." I took a sip of wine. He had just committed to a $3,000 monthly payment based on money he didn't have. But he wasn't done. He pulled his phone back out and dialed another number. I leaned closer to the screen, curious. His voice dropped an octave, becoming smooth and seductive. "Bianca, baby." "Yeah, it is Darnell." No, she is gone. I told you I would handle it, didn't I? She is out of the house. It is just me and the money now." "Bianca." My stomach tightened. That was his ex-girlfriend from high school, the one who had dumped him because he couldn't afford to take her to Miami for her birthday. "Yeah, I am inviting you over," he purred. "I am throwing a freedom party. I am ordering lobster steak, the works. I want you to see the new king of Atlanta. Come through, bring your friends. We are popping bottles all night." He hung up and looked at Brad with a grin that split his face. "She is coming. And she is bringing her crew. We need food. We need more liquor. We need to do this big." I watched as Darnell pulled out his wallet. He fished out the black credit card, the one he flashed around to his friends to prove he was a big shot. What he conveniently forgot, what he ignored because it bruised his ego, was that the card was a supplementary card on my account. I had added him 2 years ago to help him build his credit score, which was in the low 500s when we met. I paid the bill every month. I set the limits. And tonight, I controlled the flow. He dialed the number for the most expensive steakhouse in Buckhead that offered catering. "Yeah, I need 5 surf and turf platters," he ordered, his voice booming. "Add 10 bottles of Dom Perignon. And I want it delivered within the hour. Rush fee, yeah, whatever, add it on." He rattled off the card number, the expiration date, the security code. He stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for the confirmation. I opened my banking app on my phone. I navigated to the credit card management section. There was Darnell's card, labeled Hubby. I tapped the toggle switch that said Lock Card. On the screen, Darnell's smile faltered. He frowned. "What do you mean declined?" he snapped. "Run it again. It is a black card. It has a $50,000 limit. Run it again." He waited, tapping his foot impatiently. Brad looked up from his tablet, sensing the shift in energy. "They having trouble?" Brad asked. "Just a glitch," Darnell muttered. "Their machine is probably broken." I watched him try again, and again. The caterer on the other end was likely losing patience. Finally, Darnell pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it in betrayal. "They said the issuer blocked the transaction." He said, his voice small. Brad stood up. "Maybe it is a fraud alert. You know, because of the large amount. Call the bank." Darnell dialed the customer service number on the back of the card. I sat back in my hotel chair, swirling my wine, waiting for the inevitable. Since I was the primary account holder, the automated system wouldn't even let him access the security features without my social security number, which he didn't know by heart. I watched him get more and more frustrated, punching numbers into the keypad, yelling representative at the automated voice. Finally, he slammed the phone down on the counter. "They locked it," he screamed, kicking the kitchen island. "They locked the damn card." "Who locked it?" Brad asked. Keisha, Darnell roared, his eyes bulging. "That spiteful witch. She must have called them. She must have reported it lost or stolen just to spite me." He grabbed the empty champagne bottle and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, leaving a dent in the drywall and spraying glass over the hardwood floors I had spent weekends polishing. "She thinks she can stop me!" he yelled, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. "She thinks cutting off a credit card is going to stop a millionaire. I have inheritance coming. I have millions coming. She is just mad because she is broke and homeless, and I am about to be living the high life." He looked directly into the security camera in the kitchen, almost as if he knew I was watching. His face was twisted with ugly, impotent rage. "You hear me, Keisha?" he shouted at the empty room. I know you did this. You are going to pay. When I get my money, I am going to buy the bank and cancel you. You are nothing. You are a footnote. And tomorrow I am going to clear out every joint account we have before you can touch a cent. I closed the laptop, a smile playing on my lips. He was going to clear out the accounts. He was going to try to spend money he didn't have. He was going to dig a hole so deep he would never climb out. I finished my wine and stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window. The lights of Atlanta spread out before me, a sea of gold and diamonds. Darnell thought he was the king, but he was just a jester dancing on a trapdoor. He had declared war on the wrong woman. He thought cutting off my access to his imaginary fortune was a power move. But by locking that card, I hadn't just stopped a dinner order. I had fired the first shot in a siege that would leave him starving. I picked up my phone and dialed the hotel concierge. Yes, this is Ms. Vance in the presidential suite. I would like to order dinner. The lobster thermidor, please, and a bottle of your best champagne. I have something to celebrate. As I waited for my meal, I thought about Darnell sitting in the dark with no food, no car, and a house full of people he couldn't impress. He had promised Bianca a feast. He had promised Brad a fortune. And tomorrow, when he walked into the bank to make good on his threats, he was going to find out that the only thing waiting for him was the reality check of a lifetime. The shadows were my domain now, and in the dark, I was the only one who could see. The crystal chandeliers of Le Montague hummed with the quiet, expensive energy of old money. This was the kind of restaurant where the menu had no prices and the waiters knew your blood type before they poured your water. I sat at a corner table wearing a white bespoke suit that cost more than Darnell made in 3 months. Across from me sat Marcus Sterling, the CEO of a major logistics firm, and currently the subject of a federal audit I was helping him navigate. To Darnell, I was a coupon clipper, but to men like Sterling, I was the cleaner, the woman who found the bodies buried in the spreadsheets and made them disappear legally. We were discussing his offshore holdings when a commotion at the hostess stand shattered the hushed atmosphere. I did not have to turn around to know who it was. Darnell's voice, booming and arrogant, cut through the room like a chainsaw. He was demanding a table. Not just any table, but the best table. I watched over the rim of my wine glass as the maitre d' looked pained, trying to explain that reservations at Le Montague were booked 6 months in advance. Darnell was flanked by his entourage. Mama Louise was wearing a hat so large it violated several zoning laws, and Tasha was squeezed into a sequined dress that belonged in a nightclub, not a 5-star French restaurant. Hanging off Darnell's arm was Bianca, looking bored and expensive. And trailing behind them like a lost puppy was Brad, trying to look like he belonged in a room where the napkins were linen, not paper. "Do you know who I am?" Darnell shouted, slapping a wad of cash onto the podium. "I am the heir to the Hattie Vance estate. I can buy this place and turn it into a sneaker shop." The maitre d' signaled for security, but before he could escalate the situation, Tasha's eyes scanned the room and locked onto me. Her jaw dropped. She grabbed Darnell's arm and pointed a long acrylic nail in my direction. "Look who it is!" she screeched, her voice shrill enough to crack glass. "It is the homeless woman. What is she doing here?" Darnell spun around. When he saw me sitting there looking calm and wealthy, his face twisted into a mask of confusion and rage. He marched over, ignoring the staff trying to intercept him. His family followed, a chaotic parade of tackiness invading my sanctuary. "Well, well, well," Darnell sneered, stopping right at our table. "Look at you, Keisha. Did you spend your last $10 on a glass of water? Who is this?" He gestured rudely at Mr. Sterling. "Your new sugar daddy. I didn't know you had it in you to work the corners so fast." Mr. Sterling stiffened, his face hardening. "Is this man bothering you, Ms. Vance?" Darnell laughed a loud, ugly sound. "Miss Vance, please. Her name is Mrs. Wilson and she is my charity case. Or she was until I kicked her out. Hey, old man, you better check your wallet. She is probably charging you by the hour." Tasha stepped forward, her eyes burning with jealousy. She looked at my suit, then at my jewelry, real diamonds, not the cubic zirconia she wore. You stole his money, didn't you? She accused, leaning over the table. That is how you are here. You stole Darnell's inheritance money before you left. You are nothing but a thief and a fraud. I carefully set down my wineglass. Tasha, you are making a scene, and you are embarrassing yourself. Go sit down before security throws you out. Don't you tell me what to do? Tasha yelled. She grabbed a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray. Before anyone could react, she threw the contents directly at me. The cold liquid splashed across my face and soaked into the white fabric of my jacket. The restaurant went dead silent. The only sound was the drip of expensive Merlot hitting the floor. There, Tasha spat satisfied. Now you look like trash. Just like you are. Mama Louise cackled, clapping her hands. That is right, baby girl. Baptize her. Let everyone know she is unclean. I sat there for a second, feeling the wine seep into my skin. I did not scream. I did not cry. I picked up my napkin and calmly wiped my face. I stood up slowly. I was taller than Tasha in my heels, and for the first time she looked afraid. Mr. Sterling stood up as well, ready to defend me, but I held up a hand. I got this, Marcus, I said, my voice low and steady. I looked at Darnell. He was grinning, enjoying my humiliation. He thought he had won. He thought he had put me in my place. You think this is funny, Darnell? I asked. I think it is hilarious, he said, putting his arm around Bianca. Look at you, soaked and broke. You really thought you could come in here and pretend to be one of us. You are a clerk, Keisha, a nobody. I turned to the manager, Henri, who had rushed over, his face pale. He knew me. He knew me very well because I had audited this restaurant 2 years ago and saved them from a tax lien that would have shuttered their doors. Henri first said, ignoring the wine dripping from my sleeve. I am so sorry for the disturbance. Please apologize to the other guests on my behalf. Of course, Ms. Vance, Henri said, bowing slightly. Security is on the way. No, I said, holding up a hand. Let them stay. In fact, give them the table they want, the best one available. Darnell looked confused, but then his ego took over. See, he told Henri. Even she knows who the boss is. Get us a table. And bring us the most expensive champagne you have. They sat down at a table in the center of the room, loud and triumphant. They ordered everything on the menu: lobster, caviar, truffles. They ate like starving wolves, laughing and pointing at me. Darnell toasted to his freedom and his fortune. I sat back down. Mr. Sterling looked at me with concern. Keisha, are you all right? I am fine, Marcus, I said, taking a sip of water. In fact, I am better than fine. When they were finished gorging themselves, Darnell waved for the check. He pulled out his wallet, ready to flash the cash he had likely borrowed from a loan shark since his credit cards were dead. But the waiter didn't bring the check to him. He brought it to me. I took the leather folder. The bill was astronomical. $4,000 for one meal. Darnell watched me confused. I pulled out my black card. The real one. The one made of titanium that you have to be invited to own. The one Darnell didn't even know existed. I placed it in the folder. Add a 30% tip, I told the waiter loud enough for Darnell to hear. And bring the receipt to the gentleman. The waiter processed the card and walked over to Darnell's table. He placed the receipt in front of him. Darnell picked it up. His eyes bulged when he saw the zero balance. He looked at the card receipt. Paid by Keisha Vance. I stood up and walked over to their table. The entire restaurant was watching. I leaned down close to Darnell's ear. You enjoyed the meal? I asked. He looked at me, his face a mixture of anger and shame. Why did you do that? He hissed. You trying to make me look broke? I smiled a cold shark-like smile. I just wanted to buy you dinner, Darnell. Consider it an act of charity. I pulled a pen from my purse and wrote a note on the back of his copy of the receipt. I slammed it down on the table next to his empty dessert plate. Read it, I said. He looked down. In my neat, precise handwriting, I had written, the last meal of a condemned man. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, Mr. Sterling right beside me. I didn't look back, but I heard the sound of Darnell flipping the table over. I heard the crash of dishes and the screams of his family. I heard security finally dragging them out. Outside, the cool night air felt good against my wine-soaked skin. "That was impressive," Mr. Sterling said, opening the door of his limo for me. "Terrifying, but impressive." "He hasn't seen anything yet," I said, sliding into the back seat. "He thinks I paid that bill to show off. He doesn't realize that by accepting that meal, he just proved to the court that he has no assets and relies on me for support. I just documented his insolvency in front of 50 witnesses." Darnell stood on the sidewalk as we drove away, screaming at the valet because they wouldn't retrieve his car without the ticket he had lost in the chaos. He looked small, he looked desperate, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked scared. He vowed to speed up the divorce to cut me loose before I could humiliate him again. He didn't know that was exactly what I wanted. He was running full speed toward the cliff edge, and I was the one who had greased the runway. The fluorescent lights of the Fulton County Courthouse buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to match the headache pulsing behind my eyes. The hallways smelled of stale coffee floor wax and the specific kind of desperation that only exists in family court. I sat on a hard wooden bench clutching my purse, my posture slumped in a performance of defeat that I had been rehearsing all morning. Across the aisle, Darnell was pacing back and forth in a suit that was too shiny and shoes that squeaked with every step. He checked his new gold watch every 30 seconds, tapping the face as if he could make time move faster by force of will. Next to him stood his legal counsel, a man named Mr. Finkel, who looked like he had purchased his degree from the internet. Darnell had bragged about hiring a shark, but Mr. Finkel looked more like a bottom feeder. His tie was stained, and he carried his files in a plastic grocery bag instead of a briefcase. This was the representation Darnell had chosen to secure his multi-million-dollar future, because even when he thought he was rich, he was too cheap to pay for quality. Darnell stopped pacing and glared at me. "Why are we waiting?" He snapped, his voice echoing in the corridor. "I paid for an expedited hearing. I have business to attend to. Real business. Not this petty administrative nonsense." "You know the court runs on its own time, Darnell," I said, keeping my voice small and trembling. "I am just ready to get this over with." Mr. Finkel leaned in, whispering loudly enough for me to hear. "Don't worry, Mr. Wilson. She looks broken. We are going to get everything you asked for. She doesn't even have a lawyer present. This is like taking candy from a baby." I lowered my head, letting my hair curtain my face to hide the smirk that threatened to break through. I didn't need a lawyer present because I had drafted the agreement myself 3 days ago, under the guidance of Mr. Henderson, and sent it anonymously to Finkel's office as a draft proposal. Finkel had been too lazy to write his own, so he had just printed it out and slapped his letterhead on it. He thought he was brilliant. He had no idea he was handing his client a loaded gun and telling him to look down the barrel. The bailiff finally opened the heavy oak doors and called our names. Case number 409, Wilson versus Wilson. We filed into the small hearing room. It wasn't a grand courtroom, just a functional space with a tired-looking judge sitting behind a podium piled high with files. Judge Mathis didn't look up as we approached the bench. "This is an uncontested dissolution. Is that correct?" the judge asked, flipping through the paperwork. "Yes, Your Honor," Finkel said, puffing out his chest. "My client, Mr. Wilson, is a man of significant means, and he wishes to be generous by allowing a swift resolution. However, given the disparity in their future prospects, we have drafted a strict separation of assets." The judge looked over his glasses at me. "Ms. Vance, I see you are representing yourself. Have you reviewed this settlement agreement?" "Yes, Your Honor," I whispered, wringing my hands together in my lap. "And you understand what you are signing away?" The judge asked, his brow furrowing. "According to this, you are waiving all rights to alimony. You are waiving all claims to marital property acquired during the marriage. And most importantly, you are waiving any and all rights to future inheritance or assets acquired by your spouse effective immediately upon signing. I risked a glance at Darnell. He was grinning, practically vibrating with greed. He nodded at me, his eyes wide and threatening, urging me to agree. He thought that clause was protecting his inheritance from me. He thought it was the iron wall that would keep me from touching Aunt Hattie's millions. I understand, Your Honor, I said, my voice shaking just the right amount. I just want to move on. I don't want anything from him. Mr. Finkel let out a short, derisive laugh that he tried to turn into a cough. Your Honor, if I may interject, Finkel said, smirking at me. The plaintiff recognizes that she contributed very little to the financial standing of the marriage. She is doing the right thing by stepping aside and letting Mr. Wilson enjoy the fruits of his labor without burden. The insult was so rich coming from a man whose client had drained our bank account 5 days ago that I almost broke character. Contributed little. I had paid the mortgage, the insurance, and the credit card bills for 5 years while Darnell spent his paycheck on rims and bottle service. But I swallowed the rage. Let them have their moment. The higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. The judge looked from Darnell's arrogant face to my submissive posture. He shook his head, clearly thinking I was a fool for walking away with nothing. Very well, the judge sighed. If you are certain, Miss Vance. I am certain, I said. Then let's get this signed. Finkel slid the document across the table toward me. It was thick, heavy with legal jargon that I knew by heart. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled not from fear but from anticipation. This was it, the final lock on the cage. I turned to the last page. There it was, Clause 14b. Both parties hereby irrevocably waive any claim to assets, inheritance, or windfalls received by the other party, whether known or unknown at the time of signing. This waiver survives the dissolution of marriage and is binding in perpetuity. Darnell tapped the table impatiently. Sign it, Keisha, he hissed. Stop stalling. I have a meeting with a realtor in an hour. I looked up at him, my eyes wide and watery. You promise you will leave me alone after this, Darnell? You won't try to come back? He laughed, a cold, heartless sound. Come back to what, Keisha? You have nothing. I am going to be living in a mansion while you are renting a room somewhere. Why would I ever look back at you? Just sign the paper and disappear. I touched the pen to the paper. I signed my name slowly, carefully, ensuring every letter was legible. I dated it. I pushed the paper back to Finkel. It is done, I said. Darnell grabbed the pen and signed his name with a flourish, pressing so hard he almost tore the paper. He threw the pen down like he had just signed a record deal. There, he said loud enough for the back row to hear. Free at last. The judge banged his gavel. The sound was sharp and final like a gunshot. Divorce granted. The court accepts the settlement agreement as binding. You are no longer husband and wife. Next case. We walked out of the courtroom and back into the hallway. The moment the doors closed behind us, Darnell let out a whoop of joy that made people stare. He grabbed Finkel by the shoulders and shook him. We did it, he shouted. We cleaned her out. She got nothing, man. Nothing. I am free and I am rich. Finkel smirked at me, adjusting his cheap tie. You really should have hired a lawyer, sweetheart, he said condescendingly. You just walked away from a fortune. But hey, I guess some people are just allergic to money. I stood there clutching my purse, looking at the two of them celebrating my supposed destruction. Darnell pulled out his phone. I need to call Brad, he said. Tell him to put the offer in on the Buckhead estate. Cash offer. Tell him I am coming with the check as soon as the bank opens tomorrow. He looked at me one last time, his eyes full of triumph and cruelty. Well, Keisha, this is it. Have a nice life. Try not to starve. He didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel and strutted down the hallway, his shoes squeaking, his laughter echoing off the tiled walls. He was walking on air, convinced he was the smartest man in the building. I watched him go until he turned the corner and disappeared. Then I slowly straightened my spine. I wiped the fake tears from my eyes. I smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I dialed Mr. Henderson. "It is done," I said, my voice cool and steady. The judge signed the order. "The waiver is legally binding. Darnell just signed away his rights to everything, including the trust Aunt Hattie set up in my name." "Excellent, Keisha," Mr. Henderson replied. "I will file the paperwork immediately. By the time he walks into my office tomorrow for the reading, he will legally be a stranger to the estate." "He thinks he won Arthur," I said, walking toward the exit. "He thinks he is a single millionaire. Let him enjoy the fantasy for 24 more hours," Mr. Henderson said. "The fall is always more painful when you think you are flying." I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, harsh sunlight of the Atlanta afternoon. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like exhaust and hot asphalt, but to me it smelled like victory. Darnell had his freedom, but I had the future. And tomorrow, when he found out that the fortune he had already spent in his mind belonged to the ex-wife he had just discarded, the sound of his world shattering was going to be music to my ears. I hailed a cab and headed back to the Ritz. I had a busy day ahead of me. I had to buy a dress for the reading. Something black. Something expensive. Something that looked like mourning, but felt like revenge. The sun had barely risen over the Atlanta skyline, but Darnell was already living in a future that did not exist. He had spent the night on a friend's couch because he was too proud to sleep in the house he was planning to sell, and too broke to book a hotel room after I had frozen his access to my credit cards. But none of that mattered to him now. In his mind, he was already a tycoon, a mogul, a man of unlimited means. He woke up with a headache from the cheap liquor he had switched to after the champagne ran out, but he shook it off, putting on the same suit he had worn to court. He splashed some water on his face and practiced his millionaire smile in the mirror. Today was the day he would claim his kingdom. By 10 in the morning, he had assembled his entourage. Mama Louise was wearing her Sunday best, a bright purple dress with a matching hat that looked like a satellite dish. She had insisted on coming along to inspect what she called her son's palace. Tasha was there too, scrolling through Instagram on a phone with a cracked screen, already picking out the backdrops for her first influencer photo shoot in the new house. And then there was Brad, the architect of Darnell's financial ruin, acting like he was the smartest man in the room. They pulled up to the gates of the Chatsworth estate in Brad's leased BMW. It was a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive part of Buckhead, a place where old money lived quietly behind high hedges and iron gates. Darnell didn't want quiet. He wanted loud. He wanted a house that screamed, "I have arrived." Brad punched in the gate code with a flourish. He didn't actually have the listing for this house, but he knew the real agent was out of town and had snagged the lockbox code from a colleague's desk. He was playing a dangerous game, but he was desperate for a commission that could pay off his own gambling debts. "Look at that, Darnell," Brad said, as the house came into view. 12,000 square feet. 10 bedrooms. A 12-car garage. "This is where a king lives, Darnell. This is where you belong." Darnell's eyes went wide. He stepped out of the car and stared up at the massive limestone facade. He looked like a child walking into Disney World for the first time. "This is it," he breathed. "This is the one. Mama, pick out your room." Mama Louise didn't need to be told twice. She marched up the front steps, pushing past Brad to get to the double mahogany doors. "I want the one with the balcony," she declared, her voice echoing in the empty foyer. "I need a place to drink my morning tea and watch the neighbors be jealous, and I want a garden, Darnell. You need to hire a gardener. I am done pulling weeds." I watched all of this unfold later through the digital trail Darnell left behind, but I knew exactly what was happening in real time because Brad was live streaming the tour on his private Facebook page, trying to drum up interest for his realty business. I sat in my hotel room sipping coffee and watching them measure drapes for windows they would never own. Tasha wandered into the massive chef's kitchen, running her hand over the marble countertops. "This lighting is perfect," she said, posing for a selfie. "Darnell, I need $10,000 as soon as the check clears." "10,000?" Darnell asked, distracted by the Viking range. "What for?" Dr. Miami, Tasha said, turning to the side to check her profile in the reflection of the oven door. I need a full body overhaul. Lipo, new teeth, everything. I can't be a millionaire's sister looking like I shop at the mall. I need to look like I belong on a yacht. And Mom wants a facelift too, don't you, Mama? Mama Louise shouted from the top of the grand staircase. Just a little tuck, Darnell? Nothing drastic? Just enough to make Sister Patterson at church swallow her dentures. Darnell laughed, waving his hand expansively. Done, he said. Get whatever you want. Get 2 facelifts. We have the money. We have endless money. Brad cleared his throat, pulling a thick stack of documents from his briefcase. He laid them out on the kitchen island right next to where Tasha was leaning. Speaking of money, Darnell, we need to talk strategy, Brad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The owners of this place have another offer. A cash offer from a tech CEO. If we want to lock this down today, we need to put down a non-refundable deposit. Immediately. How much? Darnell asked, feeling the leather of the bar stool. 50,000, Brad said without blinking. But listen, I know the inheritance takes 48 hours to clear probate. I know you are good for it, but the sellers won't wait, so I called in a favor. Brad pulled out a contract that looked less like a real estate document and more like a deal with the devil. I have a private lender, a bridge loan specialist who is willing to front you the cash right now, Brad explained. He knows about the inheritance. He knows you are a safe bet. He will wire the 50,000 directly to the escrow account today to secure the house. You just need to sign here. Darnell looked at the paper. He didn't read the fine print. He didn't see the interest rate, which was set at a predatory 25% compounded weekly. He didn't see the clause that put up his future inheritance as absolute collateral, meaning, if he defaulted, the lender could garnish every penny Hattie had left him. He only saw the keys to the mansion dangling in front of his face. What is the fee? Darnell asked, trying to sound like a businessman. Peanuts, Brad assured him. Just a small processing fee when you pay it back next week. It is standard for high net worth individuals, Darnell. You have to spend money to make money. Darnell nodded sagely as if he understood finance. He picked up the pen. Give me the paper, he said. Let's buy a house. He signed his name with a flourish, pressing hard into the paper, sealing his fate. Brad snatched the document back, his eyes gleaming with greed. He knew Darnell wasn't getting millions. He knew there was a risk. But Brad was betting on getting his finder's fee from the lender before the whole house of cards collapsed. He was feeding his own brother-in-law to the wolves for a quick payday. Mama Louise came down the stairs beaming. I found it, she announced. The master suite. It has a jacuzzi tub, Darnell. I am going to soak in it tonight. When are we moving in? Tonight, Darnell said, emboldened by the signature he had just put on the page. Why wait? I will hire movers. We will sleep on the floor if we have to. This is our house now. They spent the next hour walking through the empty rooms, planning parties they would never throw, and inviting imaginary guests to marvel at their success. Tasha spent the entire time on the phone with a plastic surgery clinic in Miami, booking a consultation and giving them Darnell's name as the guarantor for the payment. Just as they were walking out the front door, Darnell's phone rang. He pulled it out, frowning at the unknown number. He put it on speaker because he was a man who had nothing to hide anymore. This is Darnell Wilson, he answered, his voice booming. Mr. Wilson, this is Tony from Quick Cash Auto. The voice on the other end was rough like gravel in a blender. We are calling about the G-Wagon you ordered yesterday. Yeah, is it ready? Darnell asked, grinning at Brad. I am ready to pick it up. Not exactly, Tony said. There is an issue with the down payment transfer. You said you were wiring $10,000 this morning. The transfer didn't go through. And the credit check we ran on your wife, she flagged the inquiry as fraudulent. Darnell's face turned purple. My wife doesn't control my money, he shouted. I told you I am good for it. I am an heir. I have millions coming on Friday. Tony chuckled, a sound that had zero humor in it. Look, buddy, I don't care if you are the Prince of Zamunda. No cash, no car. And since you signed a contract promising payment within 24 hours, you are now in breach. You owe us a cancellation fee of $5,000. Darnell laughed, incredulous. Cancellation fee? You must be crazy. I am Darnell Wilson. I am going to buy your whole lot and fire you. Do you hear me? I am going to ruin you. Listen to me, little man. Tony's voice dropped low and menacing. We know where you are. We know you are at the Chatsworth estate right now pretending to be a big shot. We have repo guys who work the area. You pay the fee by noon, or we come collect it from your kneecaps. Do you understand? Darnell looked around the empty driveway. His bravado faltered for a second, but then his ego roared back to life. He couldn't look weak in front of his mother. He couldn't look broke in front of Brad. You threaten me! Darnell screamed into the phone. Bring it on! Come find me! I have security. I have lawyers. I have more money than you will see in 10 lifetimes. Come get your little $5,000. I will use it to wipe my shoes. He hung up the phone, breathing hard. Mama Louise looked worried for the first time. Who was that baby? She asked, clutching her purse. Nobody, Mama, Darnell said, straightening his jacket. Just some haters. People always try to bring you down when you are at the top. But they can't touch us. We are untouchable. He looked at the mansion one last time, possessing it with his eyes. Let's go get some lunch, he said. I want seafood. And Brad, call the movers. I want to be sleeping here by midnight. They piled back into the car, leaving the mansion behind. Darnell sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through Zillow, looking for vacation homes in panic, trying to spend money fast enough to outrun the silence that was creeping up on him. He didn't know that the lender Brad had used was actually a front for the same group Tony worked for. He didn't know that by signing that housing contract and then defaulting on the car payment, he had just triggered a cross-collateralization clause that would allow them to come after everything he owned, including his future wages. He thought he was driving toward a feast. He didn't realize he was the main course. I sat in the high back leather chair of the hotel suite, watching the sun dip below the Atlanta horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. My phone rested on the mahogany desk, the speakerphone active. Mr. Henderson was on the other end, his voice raspy with the kind of affection he usually reserved for his grandchildren. We were not talking about legal strategies or asset division. We were talking about the woman who had started this entire war. We were talking about Hattie. To Darnell and his grasping family, Hattie was just a senile old woman who sat in her rocking chair humming gospel hymns and hoarding cash in her mattress. They thought her wealth came from a life insurance policy from a husband who died 40 years ago. They saw her as a piggy bank to be smashed open. They had no idea who she really was. She owned half of the historic district, Arthur said, smiling at the memory. She bought those dilapidated brownstones back in the 80s when everyone else was fleeing to the suburbs. She saw value where everyone else saw ruin. She was a visionary. Mr. Henderson agreed, his tone reverent. She was the silent partner in 3 major commercial developments downtown. She sat on the board of the community bank that denied Darnell a loan last year. She wasn't just rich Keisha. She was powerful, and she played the part of the confused old lady perfectly because it let her see who people really were when they thought she wasn't looking. The memory of 3 years ago hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was the day I realized exactly what kind of man I had married. Darnell had called me, claiming he was going to visit Aunt Hattie at the nursing home to bring her flowers. It sounded sweet, out of character, but sweet. But something in his voice had triggered my internal alarm bells, the same instinct that helped me find hidden offshore accounts in my daily work. I had left work early and driven to the facility. I walked into her room quietly. Hattie was sitting up in bed looking frail, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. Darnell was standing over her, a document spread out on the tray table. He was holding a pen, trying to press it into her shaking hand. Just sign right here, Auntie, he was saying, his voice thick with fake concern. This just gives me permission to handle the gardening at your big house. You know the weeds are getting bad. I just want to help you out so the city doesn't fine you. Just a little signature right there. I had stepped closer, my eyes scanning the document upside down. It wasn't a landscaping authorization. It was a quitclaim deed transferring the title of her primary residence, a historic mansion worth $2 million, directly to Darnell Wilson for the sum of $1. Put the pen down, Darnell, I had said, my voice cracking like a whip. He jumped, dropping the pen. He spun around, his face flushing with guilt and then immediate anger. Keisha, what are you doing here? This is family business. I walked over and picked up the document, reading it aloud. Grantor Hattie Mae Vance hereby conveys and quit claims to grantee Darnell Wilson. Is this family business, Darnell? Stealing a house from an old woman who is on pain medication. He tried to snatch the paper from me. She wants me to have it. She said so. She can't manage it anymore. I looked at Hattie. Her eyes, usually sharp, were clouded with confusion, or so I thought. But then as Darnell turned his back to scream at me, she looked directly at me. She winked. It was a slow, deliberate wink. And then she dropped the act. Get him out of here, Keisha, she said, her voice clear and commanding. And tell him if he ever tries to hustle me again, I will cut his tongue out. Darnell had fled terrified. He spent the next 3 years telling everyone who would listen that Hattie was losing her mind, that she was paranoid and mean. He told Mama Louise that I had confused her, that I had poisoned her against him. They believed him because it was easier to believe that Hattie was crazy than to admit their golden boy was a thief. They convinced themselves that despite her anger, she loved him best because he was the only male heir. They banked their entire future on the delusion that blood was thicker than integrity. They never knew about the meetings Hattie and I had after that. They didn't know that every Sunday while Darnell was watching football, I was at her house reviewing her portfolios. She taught me everything she knew about real estate, about leverage, about knowing when to hold and when to fold. She wasn't just my husband's aunt, she was my mentor. They still think she was senile, Arthur, I told the lawyer over the phone, bringing myself back to the present. Mama Louise was telling people at the restaurant that Hattie barely knew her own name at the end. She said Hattie clung to Darnell's photo and cried for him. Arthur scoffed. The only thing Hattie cried for was the future of her lineage if it was left in Darnell's hands. She was sharp as a tack until her last breath, Keisha. She dictated the final amendments to her will 3 days before she passed. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew Darnell was drowning in debt. She knew about Tasha's sticky fingers. And she definitely knew about you. I walked to the window, looking out at the city Hattie had helped build. Do they have any idea about the scale of the estate? I asked. None, Arthur replied. Darnell thinks he is getting a few million from life insurance and the house. He has no clue about the commercial holdings, the apartment complexes, the land leases. He is expecting a windfall. He doesn't realize he is walking into an empire that he has been specifically barred from entering. I could picture Darnell right now, probably sitting in that empty rental house, bragging to his friends about how he was going to buy a boat. He was so small, so limited in his vision. He wanted to be rich so he could spend money. Hattie wanted to be rich so she could build things. That was the fundamental difference they never understood. It is time, Arthur, I said. Send the invitations. I have already drafted them, he said. I am sending a courier to the rental house within the hour. I am not holding the reading at my satellite office in Buckhead. I am hosting it at the main headquarters of Sterling, Cooper and Vance, the boardroom on the 45th floor. Vance, I asked. Yes, Arthur said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Hattie owned the building, Keisha. She was a silent partner in the law firm, too. We are reading her will in her own building. It seemed fitting. It was perfect. Darnell would walk into a skyscraper thinking he was about to inherit the world, never knowing that the very floor he stood on belonged to the woman he had tried to rob. Send them, I said. Make sure Mama Louise and Tasha are invited, too. I want them all there. Consider it done, Keisha, Arthur said. And Keisha, wear something intimidating. Hattie would have wanted you to look like the boss you are. I hung up the phone. I didn't need to be told to dress the part. I had already picked out my outfit, a black structural dress that looked like armor, stilettos sharp enough to puncture an ego. Tomorrow morning, the courier would knock on Darnell's door. He would tear open the heavy envelope, seeing the embossed gold lettering of the law firm. He would call Mama Louise, screaming with excitement, thinking this was the final validation of his greatness. They would spend the next 24 hours planning their outfits, dreaming of the checks they would write, the people they would fire, the lives they would destroy with their new power. They would walk into that boardroom like royalty, and I would be waiting for them. Not as the ex-wife they had discarded, not as the poor relation they had mocked, but as the only person in the room who knew the truth about Hattie Vance. She wasn't a victim. She was a titan, and she had chosen her successor very carefully. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the steel jaws were about to snap shut. The white stretch limousine pulled up to the curb outside the Sterling Cooper and Vance building, looking like a wedding float that had taken a wrong turn. It was excessively long, excessively shiny, and completely out of place in the sleek corporate district of downtown Atlanta. The driver, looking embarrassed, hopped out to open the door, and out spilled the Wilson family circus. Darnell emerged first, wearing a purple suit that shimmered in the morning sun. He adjusted his sunglasses, looking up at the glass skyscraper as if he were measuring it for drapes. Mama Louise followed, struggling with the train of a gown that would have been appropriate for a royal coronation, but looked ridiculous at 9 in the morning. Tasha and Brad brought up the rear, both draped in so many logos they looked like walking billboards. They strutted toward the revolving doors, loud and oblivious, treating the sidewalk like a red carpet. I watched from the tinted window of my own car, parked across the street. I had arrived early, waiting for this exact moment. My driver, a professional who worked for the firm, opened my door. I stepped out onto the pavement. I was wearing a tailored white suit, sharp and minimalist, with simple gold jewelry. No logos, no shimmer, just power. I crossed the street, my heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete. As I approached the entrance, Mama Louise spotted me. Her eyes narrowed, and she physically moved to block the revolving door, her massive hat nearly getting caught in the mechanism. "You!" she spat, pointing a gloved finger. "What are you doing here? This is a private meeting for family, for heirs. You signed the papers, Keisha. You are nothing to us." Darnell turned around, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Let her watch Mama," he said. "Let her see what she walked away from. It will be a good lesson for her." "No," Mama Louise insisted, planting her feet. "She is bad luck. She will curse the money. Security, get this woman out of here." She waved frantically at the building's security guard, a large man named Jerome, who had worked the front desk for 10 years. Jerome looked at Mama Louise, then looked at me. He smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," Jerome said, tipping his hat to me. "Mr. Henderson is expecting you in the boardroom. The private elevator is waiting." Mama Louise's jaw dropped. "Ms. Vance," she sputtered. "Her name is Mrs. Wilson. And who do you think you are talking to? My son is about to own this whole block. You better show some respect, or you will be shining shoes by tomorrow." Jerome ignored her and held the door open for me. I walked past them, not even making eye contact. "After you," I said coolly. "Don't want to be late for your own coronation." We rode the elevator in silence. The tension was so thick it felt like humidity. Darnell kept checking his watch, tapping his foot, humming a tune to himself. Tasha was taking selfies in the mirrored walls, trying to get the best angle of her new purse. Mama Louise glared at the back of my head, muttering prayers under her breath, asking Jesus to protect her son from my witchcraft. The elevator doors opened onto the 45th floor, revealing a lobby of polished marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. Mr. Henderson stood at the end of the hall, flanked by 2 junior associates. He welcomed us into the main boardroom. A massive table made of reclaimed mahogany dominated the room, surrounded by 12 leather chairs. Darnell immediately marched to the head of the table. "This is my seat," he declared, sitting down and spinning the chair. "The boss's seat." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Actually, Mr. Wilson, the head of the table, is reserved for the executor of the estate. Please take a seat on the side. Darnell scowled but moved, muttering about technicalities. Mama Louise sat next to him, rearranging her dress. Tasha and Brad took the seats opposite them. I sat at the far end alone, calm and composed. Mr. Henderson opened a thick leather-bound folder. He adjusted his glasses and looked at each of us in turn. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Hattie Mae Vance," he began, his voice formal and grave. "As per her instructions, this reading is being recorded." He gestured to a camera mounted in the corner. Darnell waved at it, flashing a peace sign. "Get on with it, old man," Darnell said, drumming his fingers on the table. "Skip the preamble. Just tell me how many zeros are on the check." Hattie was very specific about the order of bequests, Mr. Henderson said, ignoring him. She wanted to address personal matters first. He turned a page. "To my sister Louise," he read. "I leave my collection of vintage church hats, the ones you always admired but never asked to borrow. Perhaps now that you have them, you can spend less time judging others for their appearance and more time examining your own heart. I also leave you a magnifying glass so you can finally find the speck in your own eye before you look for the plank in your daughter-in-law's." Mama Louise gasped, clutching her chest. "That hateful old woman," she shrieked. "She is mocking me from the grave. I don't want her dusty hats. I want the jewelry. Where are the diamonds?" "They have been donated to charity," Mr. Henderson said calmly. "As per her wishes." He turned another page. "To my niece Tasha and her husband Brad," he continued, "I leave a debt forgiveness certificate." Brad perked up. "Debt forgiveness? That sounds like money." "In the amount of $5,000, Mr. Henderson clarified. This covers the sum you stole from my purse during the family reunion 2 years ago. I saw you take it. I have the security footage from my home office. Instead of pressing charges, I am wiping the slate clean. Consider this your inheritance. And Brad, stop trying to sell timeshares to my friends. They know a scam when they see one." Tasha turned purple. "That is a lie," she screamed, standing up. "I never stole anything. She gave me that money." She was confused. She forgot. Mr. Henderson pulled a USB drive from the folder and placed it on the table. "The video evidence is here if you would like to review it, Mrs. Miller," he said. "Or we can move on." Brad pulled Tasha back down into her chair, his face pale. "Let it go, Tasha," he hissed. "We don't want the police involved." Darnell laughed, shaking his head. "Man, you two are petty," he said, smirking at his sister. "Stealing $5,000. That is chump change. You should have thought bigger. But whatever, who cares about hats and petty cash? Those are just crumbs. Read the main part, Henderson. Read about the Empire." He leaned back, putting his feet up on the edge of the mahogany table. "Come on, say my name," Darnell demanded. "Say Darnell Wilson, sole beneficiary. I want to hear it ring in the air." Mr. Henderson looked at Darnell over the rim of his glasses. His expression was unreadable, a perfect mask of professional indifference. "Very well, Mr. Wilson," he said. "Let us proceed to the distribution of the primary assets." He turned the page slowly, the sound of the paper crisp in the silent room. "To my grandnephew Darnell Wilson," he read. Darnell pointed at me. "You hear that, Keisha? Grandnephew. That is me. That is the bloodline." Mr. Henderson continued, his voice steady. "I know you are sitting there right now, Darnell, waiting for the world to be handed to you. You have spent your entire life waiting for things you didn't earn. You waited for your mother to pay your bills. You waited for your wife to fix your credit. And now you are waiting for me to die so you can live like a king." Darnell's smile faltered slightly. Okay. She got her jokes off," he muttered. "She was always dramatic. Just get to the numbers. I cannot in good conscience give a fortune to a man who does not know the value of $1 or the value of a woman," Mr. Henderson read. "You have treated the people who supported you with contempt. You have squandered every opportunity given to you. And you have proven time and again that you are not a builder but a destroyer. Therefore, I leave you one item." Mr. Henderson reached under the table and pulled out a small cardboard box. He slid it across the polished wood until it rested in front of Darnell. "I leave you your grandfather's work boots." Hattie's words echoed through the lawyer's voice. He wore these for 30 years working at the rail yard to buy the first property in our portfolio. They are size 11. Put them on Darnell. Maybe if you walk a mile in them you will learn what it takes to actually be a man. Darnell stared at the box. He ripped the lid off. Inside lay a pair of battered, scuffed leather boots still stained with oil and dirt from decades ago. "Is this a joke?" Darnell shouted, standing up and knocking his chair over. "Boots. Old dirty boots. Where is the money? Where are the deeds? She had millions." "I know she did." "The remaining assets," Mr. Henderson said, raising his voice over Darnell's shouting, "including the commercial properties, the investment portfolio, and the liquid cash totaling approximately $15 million, are hereby transferred into a blind trust." "A trust," Darnell yelled, his eyes wild. "Okay, fine. A trust. I can work with a trust. I am the beneficiary, right? I control it." "The trust is irrevocable," Mr. Henderson said, closing the folder, "and the sole trustee with absolute discretion over all assets and distributions appointed by Hattie Mae Vance herself is Ms. Keisha Vance." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. Darnell looked at Mr. Henderson. Then he turned his head slowly, painfully, to look at me. "Keisha," he whispered the name coming out like a curse. "Yes, Darnell," I said, leaning forward, my voice calm and cold. "Me." "No," Darnell screamed, lunging toward the table. "That is impossible. We are divorced." I signed the papers. She waived her rights. Finkel said she waived everything. "She waived her rights to your assets," Mr. Henderson corrected. "But this is not your asset, Darnell. This is Hattie's asset. And she chose to leave it to the person she trusted. The person who managed her affairs for the last 3 years. The person who didn't steal from her. The person who didn't wait for her to die." "But we are divorced," Darnell stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "She is not family anymore." "Exactly," I said, standing up. "I am not family. I am the trustee, which means I am your boss. And Darnell, I have reviewed your application for funds." I looked him up and down. "And it is denied." Darnell collapsed back into his chair, his legs giving out. Mama Louise began to fan herself, frantically muttering about the devil. Brad and Tasha looked at each other, realizing the gravity of their mistake. "You can't do this," Darnell whimpered. "I bought a house. I bought a car. I owe people money, Keisha. Bad people. They are going to kill me." "You should have thought about that before you threw my clothes on the lawn," I said. "You should have thought about that before you called me dead weight. You wanted to be a self-made man, Darnell. Well, here is your chance. Start with the boots." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. "Meeting adjourned," I said. "Oh, and Darnell security will escort you out. Don't forget your inheritance. You wouldn't want to leave your grandfather's legacy behind." Mr. Henderson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at Darnell with a gaze that was terrifyingly void of emotion. He placed his hand on the thickest file in the stack, the one bound in heavy black leather. The room went silent. Even Mama Louise stopped hyperventilating over the insults she had just received. This was it, the main event. Darnell leaned forward, licking his lips like a starving dog eyeing a steak. He was vibrating with greed, his earlier anger forgotten in the face of imminent wealth. Finally, he breathed. "Read it, Henderson. Read the numbers." Mr. Henderson opened the file. He began to list the assets. It was a staggering inventory that sucked the air right out of the room. He listed the commercial complex on Peachtree Street. He listed the apartment buildings in Midtown. He listed the diversified stock portfolio that had been quietly compounding interest since the 90s. He listed the liquid cash reserves sitting in offshore accounts. $15 million in liquid assets. Mr. Henderson read, his voice steady and monotonous. Plus real estate holdings valued at approximately $22 million. Darnell let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He slammed his hand on the table. $37 million, he shouted. "I am a king. Do you hear me? I am a king. Mama, We are buying the whole neighborhood. Brad, call the dealership back. Tell them I am buying the dealership. He stood up, knocking his chair back, looking at me with wild, triumphant eyes. And you? He sneered, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You get nothing. You walked away from $37 million. You are the stupidest woman alive. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. Please sit down, Mr. Wilson, he said. I have not finished reading the clause regarding the disposition of these assets. Darnell sat down, grinning like a maniac. Go ahead, read the fine print. Just tell me where to sign. Mr. Henderson turned the page. He looked up from the document and stared directly at Darnell. To my grandnephew, Darnell Wilson, the will read. I know you are sitting there right now waiting for this moment. I know you have spent your entire life waiting for the world to hand you what you refuse to earn. You are the only male heir by blood. That is true. Darnell nodded, bobbing his head. That is right. Bloodline. However, the will continued, and Darnell's head stopped bobbing. I cannot in good conscience hand over a lifetime of hard work to a man who does not know the value of a dollar, or the value of a human being. I have watched you, Darnell. I have watched you treat people with contempt. And most importantly, I have watched how you treat the women who support you. You treat them as servants. You treat them as disposable. I cannot give my legacy to a man who does not know how to respect a woman. Darnell's smile was flickering now, like a light bulb about to burn out. What is she talking about? He muttered. I respect women. I love women. Therefore, Mr. Henderson read, his voice rising slightly. I leave you one specific item to remember your roots. The lawyer reached under the heavy mahogany table. He pulled out a battered, grease-stained shoebox. He slid it across the polished wood. It stopped right in front of Darnell. Darnell stared at the box. He looked at the lawyer, then at the box. He reached out with trembling hands and lifted the lid. Inside lay a pair of old, cracked leather work boots. They were covered in dried mud and oil stains that had been there for 50 years. They smelled of hard labor and sweat. I leave you your grandfather's work boots. Hattie's words echoed in the room. He wore these for 30 years, working double shifts at the rail yard to buy the very first property in our portfolio. He built this family from the dirt up. They are size 11, Darnell. Put them on. Maybe if you walk a mile in them, you will learn what it takes to actually be a man instead of a parasite. Darnell stared at the boots. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He swiped the box off the table, sending the old boots clattering across the floor. Is this a joke? He screamed, veins bulging in his neck. Old boots! You are giving me old boots! Where is the money, Henderson? Where is the 37 million? This is fraud. I will sue you. I will burn this building down. Mr. Henderson did not flinch. He simply turned the page to the final section of the document. The remaining assets he read, raising his voice to be heard over Darnell's tantrum. Including the $15 million in cash, and all real estate holdings are hereby transferred in their entirety into an irrevocable blind trust. A trust, Darnell shouted, grasping at straws. Okay, fine. A trust. I can work with a trust. I am the beneficiary, right? I get an allowance. How much is it? 10 grand a month, 50 grand. The trust is designed to protect the assets from squandering and gross mismanagement, Mr. Henderson continued. The beneficiary of the trust is the Vance Family Foundation, dedicated to financial literacy and women's empowerment. Darnell looked like he had been hit by a truck. Charity, he whispered. She gave it to charity. However, Mr. Henderson said, and the room seemed to freeze. The trust requires a sole trustee to manage the assets, to make investment decisions, and to determine if and when any discretionary funds might be distributed to family members in times of dire emergency. Darnell's eyes lit up again. Okay, so who is the trustee? Is it you, Henderson? I can work with you. We can make a deal. Hattie was very specific, Mr. Henderson said, closing the folder. She wanted the trustee to be someone with financial acumen, someone with integrity, and someone who understood the value of hard work. She wanted someone who had proven their loyalty, not with words, but with actions. He looked past Darnell. He looked past Mama Louise, who was clutching her chest. He looked past Tasha and Brad, who were shrinking into their seats. He looked directly at me. The sole trustee appointed with absolute discretion over the entire estate is Ms. Keisha Vance. The silence that descended on the boardroom was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the oxygen out of the space. Darnell froze. His brain seemed to short-circuit. He looked at Mr. Henderson. He looked at the empty spot on the table where the file had been. And then slowly, mechanically, he turned his head to look at me. I sat there in my white suit, calm and untouchable. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him with the cold indifference of a stranger. "Keisha," he whispered. It was barely a sound. "Yes, Darnell," I said, my voice clear in the silence. "Me." "No," he stammered, shaking his head. "That is impossible. We are divorced. I made you sign. You waived your rights. You waived everything." Mr. Henderson interjected, his voice sharp. "She waived her rights to your assets, Mr. Wilson. She waived her rights to marital property. But this is not marital property. This is Hattie's property. And Hattie did not leave it to you. She left control of it to Keisha. Keisha does not own the money, she controls it. And that means she controls you if you ever want to see a single dime." Darnell stood up. His legs were shaking so bad his knees knocked together. He looked at his mother, but she was staring at me with a look of pure terror. He looked at Brad, but Brad was looking at the floor, trying to make himself invisible. He looked back at me. The arrogance was gone, the swagger was gone, the millionaire was gone. All that was left was a man who had thrown away a diamond to pick up a rock. "Keisha, please," he whimpered. I stood up. I smoothed my jacket. "I checked the accounts this morning, Darnell," I said. "You are overdrawn. You have no car because the repo man is waiting downstairs. You have no house because you missed rent. And now you have no inheritance." Darnell's eyes rolled back in his head. His knees buckled. He didn't just sit down, he collapsed. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, curling into a ball at the foot of the mahogany table, right next to his grandfather's dirty work boots. He lay there gasping for air, sobbing dry, heaving breaths that sounded like a dying animal. I looked down at him. "You wanted to be a king, Darnell," I said softly. "Well, heavy is the head." I picked up my purse and turned to Mr. Henderson. "I think we are done here, Arthur." "We are indeed, Ms. Vance," he said, smiling. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the marble, leaving my ex-husband sobbing on the floor of a building I now controlled. The payoff wasn't just the money. It was the look on his face when he realized that the wife he had thrown away was the only person who held the keys to his survival. And I had locked the door. The shock that had paralyzed Darnell lasted only a few seconds before it was replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. He scrambled up from the floor, his face twisted into a mask of violence that I had seen glimpses of before but never fully unleashed. He lunged across the mahogany table, grabbing Mr. Henderson by the lapels of his expensive suit, shaking the older man with a strength born of panic. "You wrote this yourself," he screamed, spitting saliva onto the polished wood. "You forged it. This is a lie." She was senile. She didn't know what she was signing. "I will have your license. I will have you thrown in jail. I will burn this whole firm to the ground." Mr. Henderson didn't even blink. He didn't look afraid. He signaled to the junior associates, who stepped forward and firmly peeled Darnell's shaking hands off his jacket. Mr. Henderson straightened his tie calmly and pressed a button on the console in front of him. "I anticipated this reaction," Mr. Henderson said, his voice cutting through Darnell's screaming, "which is why Hattie prepared for it." A massive screen descended from the ceiling, blocking the view of the city skyline. The lights in the boardroom dimmed automatically. The projector hummed to life, and there she was, Aunt Hattie, large as life, sitting in her favorite armchair, just weeks before she passed. She didn't look frail. She didn't look confused. She looked sharp, fierce, and completely in control. "I am Hattie Mae Vance." The video recording said, her voice filling the room, strong and steady. "It is October 12th. I am of sound mind and body. I am recording this because I know my family. I know that when I am gone, my nephew Darnell will try to claim I was confused. He will try to say I was manipulated. He will try to find a loophole to get his hands on money he did not earn." On the screen, Hattie leaned into the camera, her eyes narrowing. "Let the record show that I have never been more clear," she said. "Darnell, you have treated this family like your personal bank account for too long. You are a leech. You are cut off. Keisha is the only one who ever asked me how I was doing without having her hand out. She is the trustee because she is the only one with the character to manage this legacy. This is my final word. If you contest this, Darnell, you will lose, and you will be left with nothing but your shame." The screen went black. The lights came back up. Darnell stood there, panting, his chest heaving. The truth had stripped him naked in front of everyone. He looked at the blank screen, then he turned his head slowly to look at me. The rage drained out of him, instantly replaced by a terrifying, pathetic desperation. He realized that violence wouldn't work. He realized that threats wouldn't work. He had one card left to play, the manipulation card he had used on me for 5 years. He didn't scream anymore. He fell to his knees. He literally crawled across the plush carpet, ignoring the gasps of his mother, until he was right at my feet. He reached out with trembling hands, trying to grab the hem of my pants. "Keisha, baby." He sobbed, tears streaming down his face, a complete breakdown of dignity. "Keisha, please listen to me. I didn't mean it. It was just the stress. The pressure of the funeral. You know I get crazy when I am stressed." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to be the doormat I had always been. "We are family, Keisha," he cried. "We have history. 5 years. You can't throw that away over money. That piece of paper I made you sign yesterday doesn't mean anything. It was just a formality. We are still married in our hearts. We are still husband and wife in the eyes of God. You can't leave me like this. I am your husband. I love you. We can run this trust together. Just you and me, baby, against the world." The room was silent. Mama Louise was watching, hoping I would crack, hoping I would save her son so she could go back to living in luxury. I looked down at him. I waited for a flicker of emotion. I waited to feel pity or sadness or even anger. But I felt nothing. I felt the cool detachment of a forensic accountant closing a fraudulent file. He wasn't a husband. He was a bad investment that I had finally written off. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded copy of the divorce decree, the ink still fresh from the judge's stamp. I unfolded it slowly, the crisp sound of the paper echoing in the quiet room. I held it up so he could see the signature he had scrawled with such arrogance less than 24 hours ago. "I am sorry, Darnell," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "But you were very specific. I remember your exact words. You said you didn't need a wife who nagged you about money. You said you wanted a clean break so you could be a rich bachelor." I pointed to the paragraph he had been so proud of. "Clause 14b, I read aloud. "Complete separation of assets. No alimony. No claims to future inheritance. You wanted to make sure I couldn't touch your millions, Darnell. You hired a lawyer to ensure it. You forced an expedited hearing to guarantee it." I dropped the paper. It fluttered down, landing on his chest. "You got your wish," I said, cold as ice. "You are single. You are free. And you are definitely broke." "Keisha, please," Darnell wailed, clutching the paper. "Don't do this. I will change. I swear I will change." I signaled to Jerome, the security guard who had been waiting by the door. He stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Darnell. Jerome didn't hesitate. He hoisted Darnell up by his armpits like an unruly child. Darnell kicked and screamed, dragging his feet as he was hauled toward the elevator. "Wait!" I called out. Jerome paused, holding the struggling Darnell. I walked over to the corner where the old cardboard box had landed during Darnell's tantrum. I picked up the dirty work boots. I walked over and tucked them into Darnell's arms. "You forgot your inheritance," I said, looking him in the eye one last time. "Hattie wanted you to have these. Maybe you can use them to walk to the homeless shelter." "Take him out, Jerome." "No." Darnell screamed as the elevator doors opened. "Keisha." "No." The doors slid shut, cutting off his screams. I stood in the silence of the boardroom, the new matriarch of the Vance estate. I looked at Mama Louise, who was shrinking into her chair, terrified of what was coming next. But I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about Darnell standing on the sidewalk with nothing but a pair of old boots, and the crushing realization that he had handed me the keys to the kingdom and locked himself out. I walked out of the revolving doors of the Sterling Cooper and Vance building into the humid Atlanta heat. The air conditioning inside the skyscraper had been crisp and controlled, but out here on the pavement, reality was waiting to sweat the arrogance right out of my ex-husband. Darnell was already there, standing near the curb, clutching the cardboard box containing his grandfather's boots like it was a life raft. He looked disoriented, blinking in the sunlight, as if he couldn't quite process how he had gone from a penthouse boardroom to the street corner in under 5 minutes. Jerome, the security guard, stood by the doors, arms crossed, making sure Darnell didn't try to rush back inside. Mama Louise, Tasha, and Brad were huddled around Darnell, looking like survivors of a shipwreck. Mama Louise was fanning herself with a crumpled tissue, muttering about how the devil was testing them. But the test wasn't over. In fact, the final exam was just pulling up to the curb. A tow truck with the logo "Quick Cash Auto Recovery" emblazoned on the side roared to a halt right in front of the gleaming black G-Wagon Darnell had parked illegally in the loading zone. Behind the truck, a black sedan pulled up and 2 men stepped out. One of them was Tony, the man Darnell had insulted over the phone yesterday. He looked even wider in person, his neck thick with muscle, and his expression devoid of patience. Darnell froze. He recognized the voice he had mocked. He took a step back, bumping into Brad. "Mr. Wilson," Tony said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the city noise. "You are a hard man to track down. But lucky for us, you parked a $300,000 car right out front." Darnell tried to summon some of his old bluster, but his voice cracked. "Tony, listen," he stammered, holding up his hands. "There was a mix-up with the bank. A clerical error. The wire is coming. I just need 24 hours. Tony shook his head slowly. "You don't have 24 hours. You had until noon. It is now 12:15. And according to the contract you signed, you are in default. We are taking the car. And we are taking the cancellation fee." He snapped his fingers, and the driver of the tow truck began lowering the hook. "No!" Darnell screamed, lunging toward the car. "You can't take it. I have a date tonight. I need that car. It is my image." Tony stepped in front of him, blocking his path with a wall of muscle. "Your image is about to be walking, Darnell. Hand over the keys. Now, or we call the cops and report the vehicle stolen since you obtained it with false financial statements." Darnell's face went pale. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the heavy key fob. He dropped it into Tony's hand, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. He watched as his dream car, the symbol of his fake empire, was hoisted into the air. That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Brad, who had been watching the scene with growing horror, suddenly realized that his own neck was on the line. He had vouched for Darnell. He had set up the deal with the house lender, using his own questionable license as leverage. If Darnell was broke, Brad was ruined. "You lied to me!" Brad shouted, shoving Darnell hard in the chest. Darnell stumbled, dropping the box of boots. "Hey, watch it!" Darnell yelled, pushing back. "You told me you had the money." Brad screamed, his face turning red. "You told me it was a done deal. I put my reputation on the line for you. I authorized that deposit transfer based on your word. Now the lender is going to come after me. They are going to take my license." "Your license?" Darnell spat. "You are a glorified door opener, Brad. You were just trying to get a commission off me. You are a leech just like the rest of them." Tasha, who had been watching her surgery dreams drive away on the back of the tow truck, let out a shriek of pure rage. She didn't attack Darnell. She attacked the weakest link. She turned on her husband. "You are the one who told us to spend it," she yelled, clawing at Brad's arm. "You said he was good for it. You said we were going to be rich. You are a loser, Brad. I should have married the guy from the gym." She swung her heavy designer purse, the one I had bought her for Christmas 3 years ago, and hit Brad square in the side of the head. "Get off me, you crazy woman!" Brad yelled, trying to shield his face. It was a spectacle. A full-blown family brawl right on the sidewalk of the financial district. Business people in tailored suits stopped to watch, clutching their lattes. Mama Louise stood in the middle of the chaos, wailing to the sky, asking Jesus why he had forsaken his faithful servant. But Jesus was apparently busy elsewhere. I stood by my car watching them tear each other apart. It was pathetic, it was ugly, and it was exactly what they deserved. They were a pack of wolves who had run out of prey, so now they were eating each other. But the universe wasn't done with Darnell Wilson yet. Through the noise of Tasha screaming and Brad cursing, a new sound emerged. Sirens, not an ambulance. Police sirens. 2 squad cars pulled up behind the tow truck, lights flashing. The fighting stopped instantly. Brad pushed Tasha away. Darnell straightened his jacket, trying to look innocent. 2 officers stepped out. One of them held a clipboard. "Darnell Wilson," the officer called out. Darnell stepped forward, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He probably thought they were there to stop the fight, or maybe he deluded himself into thinking I had called them to help him. "Yes, officer," he said, smoothing his hair. "I am Darnell Wilson. These people are harassing me. I am a victim here." The officer walked right up to him and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Darnell Wilson, you are under arrest," the officer said, spinning him around and slamming him against the hood of the police car. "Arrest?" Darnell shouted, his face pressed against the hot metal. "For what? I didn't do anything. This is a civil dispute. You are being charged with 3 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of identity theft and falsifying loan documents," the officer recited. "We have a report from the Quick Cash Lending Group and a flag from the IRS regarding income statements you submitted yesterday. You claimed an annual income of $5 million on a federal loan application. That is a felony, son." Darnell struggled, the cuffs clicking tight around his wrists. "It was an inheritance," he screamed. "I was expecting an inheritance. Ask my lawyer. Ask my ex-wife. She is right there." He craned his neck, trying to find me in the crowd. "Keisha," he yelled. "Keisha, tell them. Tell them about Hattie. Tell them I am good for it." I stepped forward just enough for him to see me. I lowered my sunglasses. "I am sorry, officer," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying over the street noise. "I am the trustee of the estate he is referring to. Mr. Wilson has no access to those funds. He was informed of this in writing yesterday and again today. Any claim he made to those assets was a lie." Darnell went limp. The fight went out of him. He looked at me with eyes that were hollowed out by shock. "You did this," he whispered. "You did this to yourself, Darnell," I said. "I just turned on the lights." The officer shoved him into the back of the squad car. Darnell had to duck his head to fit inside. Through the window, I saw him look back one last time. He looked at the skyscraper where he thought he would rule. He looked at the tow truck taking his car. He looked at his family who were backing away, pretending they didn't know him. And then he looked at the sidewalk where his grandfather's boots lay on their side in the dirt, abandoned and forgotten. Brad and Tasha were already walking away fast, arguing in hushed tones about who was going to pay for a cab since neither of them had a working credit card. Mama Louise was left standing alone on the curb, clutching her Bible, looking at the empty space where her son used to be. I opened the door to my car. The driver held it for me. "Where to?" Ms. Vance, the driver asked. "Take me to the old house," I said. "Mama Louise's house. I have one last eviction notice to serve before I call it a day." I slid into the cool leather seat and watched as the police car merged into traffic, taking Darnell away to a place where the only thing he would be managing was a communal toilet. The fallout was complete. The debris had settled. And for the first time in 5 years, the air in Atlanta felt clean. The drive to the house on Maple Street was quiet. My driver navigated the afternoon traffic with professional ease while I sat in the back seat watching the city pass by. This was the house where Darnell had grown up. It was the house where Mama Louise held court every Sunday, presiding over family dinners like a queen on a throne. She had always made it clear that I was a guest in her domain, a peasant allowed to sit at the table only by her grace. She loved to talk about the Wilson family legacy, about how this house had been in the family for generations. I knew the truth, of course. I knew it because Hattie had shown me the deed 3 years ago. The Wilson family didn't own the bricks they stood on. Hattie did. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it always did, perfectly manicured and imposing. But the energy was different. The front door was open and Mama Louise was sitting on the porch swing, still wearing her ridiculous church hat, which was now slightly askew. She was rocking back and forth, clutching her Bible, mumbling to herself. When she saw my car pull up, she stopped rocking. She stood up, her face twisting into a familiar mask of disdain and fury. I stepped out of the car. I didn't rush. I walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching under my heels. "You have some nerve showing your face here," Mama Louise shouted before I even reached the steps. "After what you did to my son. You sent him to jail. You demon. You Jezebel." I stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her. "I didn't send him anywhere, Louise," I said, my voice calm. "The federal government did. I just stopped paying for his mistakes." "Get off my property!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the street. "I don't want you here. This is a house of God. We don't allow traitors here. Leave before I call the sheriff." I walked up 2 steps. "Go ahead," I said. "Call him. In fact, I think you should. It might make the next 5 minutes easier." She faltered, confused by my lack of fear. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "This is my house. You have no right to be here." I reached into my purse. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a single crisp document stamped with the official seal of the Vance Trust. "Actually, Louise, that is where you are wrong," I said. "This house isn't yours. It never was." I climbed the final steps until I was standing right in front of her. She smelled of old lavender and fear. "Do you remember 1995, Louise?" I asked. "Do you remember when your husband left you with a mountain of debt and a foreclosure notice on this very door? You were going to be on the street with a 10-year-old Darnell." She blinked, her eyes darting nervously. "That is ancient history," she muttered. "We handled it. The Lord provided. The Lord didn't provide, Louise. Hattie did." I held up the document. "Hattie bought this house from the bank 20 years ago," I explained. "She paid off your debt. She put the deed in her name to protect it from your creditors. She let you live here rent-free for 2 decades because she didn't want her nephew to be homeless. She never asked you for a dime. And how did you repay her? By waiting for her to die so your son could sell it and gamble the money away." Mama Louise stepped back, her hand finding the porch column for support. "That is a lie," she whispered. "Hattie gave me this house. She said it was mine." "She gave you a roof over your head," I corrected. "She kept the title. And as of this morning, when the trust went into effect, the title belongs to the Vance Family Foundation." I looked around the porch at the wicker furniture, at the potted plants, at the kingdom she thought she ruled. And as the sole trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to manage the assets responsibly. And frankly, Louise having a tenant who pays 0 rent and abuses the landlord is bad business. I thrust the paper toward her. She didn't take it, so I tucked it into the pocket of her purple dress. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It is an eviction notice," I said. Her knees gave out. She slumped onto the swing, the chains creaking under her weight. "Eviction," she gasped. "You can't do that. I am family. I am an old woman. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't know," I said, shrugging. "Maybe you can go stay with Tasha." "Oh, wait. Tasha is renting a one-bedroom apartment, and she just assaulted her husband in public, so she might be busy dealing with legal issues too." Mama Louise looked up at me, tears finally spilling over her heavy makeup. "Keisha, have mercy," she pleaded. "You are a Christian woman. You can't put me on the street." "Mercy," I repeated, tasting the word. I thought about the night before. I thought about the rain. I thought about my clothes landing in the mud while she stood on this very porch, laughing. I thought about the way she had mocked me for 5 years, calling me barren, calling me cheap, calling me unworthy. I leaned in close so she could see the lack of sympathy in my eyes. "The law requires me to give you 30 days' notice," I said. "That is the standard mercy the state allows." She let out a breath of relief. 30 days. "Okay, I can fix this in 30 days. But I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I am not the state, Louise. I am the woman whose clothes you watched your son throw into the dirt less than 24 hours ago. You didn't give me 30 days. You gave me 30 minutes. I straightened up, looking down at her. "So, here is the deal. I am going to expedite the process. I have a crew coming to renovate this property on Monday morning. That gives you 3 days. 72 hours. 3 days, she shrieked. That is impossible. I have furniture. I have hats. I have a life here. Then I suggest you start packing, I said. Because at 9 a.m. on Monday, the locks get changed. Anything left inside becomes the property of the trust. And Louise, I know how much you love those hats. It would be a shame if they ended up on the lawn." I turned and walked back down the steps. "Keisha," she screamed after me. "You can't do this. I will tell the church. I will tell everyone. Tell them I called back without turning around. Tell them exactly what happened. Tell them how you bit the hand that fed you for 20 years and how that hand finally slapped back." I got into the car and closed the door, shutting out her wails. Back to the hotel, Ms. Vance, the driver, asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror with a newfound respect. "Yes," I said, leaning back into the seat. "And then take me to the airport. I have a flight to Paris to book. I hear the shopping is excellent this time of year." As we pulled away, I watched Mama Louise sitting on the porch of a house she no longer owned, alone in the ruin she had helped create. She had spent her life looking down on people she thought were beneath her. Now she was finally going to learn what the world looked like from the bottom up. 3 months have passed since the sirens faded from the streets of downtown Atlanta, but the silence that followed has been the most beautiful music I have ever heard. The humid Georgia summer has given way to a crisp golden autumn. The leaves are changing color, turning the city into a painting of fire and amber. But nowhere is the view more spectacular than from the terrace of the Chatsworth estate. It is ironic, really. This was the mansion Darnell had tried to buy with money he did not have. This was the house Brad had tried to use to scam a commission. They had walked through these halls measuring for drapes and planning parties. Now I own it. But I did not buy it to live in alone like a queen in a tower. I bought it to honor the woman who made it all possible. Today is the grand opening of the Hattie Vance Center for Financial Independence. I walked through the double mahogany doors, my heels clicking on the marble floors that had been polished to a mirror shine. The house was buzzing with activity, but it wasn't filled with social climbers or sycophants. It was filled with women. Young women from underserved communities learning how to code. Single mothers learning how to invest. Older women learning how to protect their assets from predatory relatives. I paused by the grand staircase. I remembered how Mama Louise had claimed the master suite for herself, how she wanted a balcony to look down on her neighbors. Now that suite was a library filled with books on economics law and business management. The jacuzzi tub she had coveted was gone, replaced by a reading nook overlooking the gardens. As for the Wilson family, Their current accommodations are far less luxurious. I received an update from Mr. Henderson this morning. Darnell is currently residing in the Fulton County Jail awaiting trial for federal wire fraud and identity theft. Because he is considered a flight risk and has zero assets to post bail, he has been denied release. The man who wanted to be a king is now working in the prison laundry, earning 12 cents an hour scrubbing sheets. I heard through the grapevine that he spends his recreation time staring at his shoes. They are cheap canvas slip-ons issued by the state. I wonder if he ever thinks about his grandfather's boots. I wonder if he wishes he had them now to protect his feet from the cold concrete floors. Mama Louise did not fare much better. After the eviction, she tried to move in with Tasha, but Tasha's small apartment could not hold two egos of that size. They fought constantly. Tasha blamed her mother for raising a delusional son, and Mama Louise blamed Tasha for marrying a crook. Eventually, Mama Louise ended up in a state-funded senior living facility on the outskirts of town. It is a clean place, but it is small and she has to share a room. There is no space for her hat collection. She spends her days telling anyone who will listen that she used to be royalty, that her daughter-in-law stole her kingdom. But the nurses just nod and give her pudding. Tasha and Brad are divorced. It happened quickly after Brad lost his real estate license and was named as a co-conspirator in Darnell's fraud case. Tasha is working double shifts at a diner near the airport trying to pay off the debts she racked up in her own name. She posted a photo on social media last week. No filters, no designer bags, just a tired woman in a uniform. It was the first honest thing she has ever shared. I walked out onto the terrace where the reception was in full swing. Waiters passed around trays of hors d'oeuvres, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and intelligent conversation. Mr. Henderson was standing by the railing holding 2 glasses of champagne. He looked younger than he had in years, his face relaxed and smiling. He handed me a glass as I approached. "She would have loved this, Keisha," he said, looking out over the crowd. "This is exactly what she wanted. She didn't want the money to sit in a bank. She wanted it to work. She wanted it to build ladders for people to climb." I took the glass and turned to look at the large portrait we had unveiled earlier that afternoon. It hung above the outdoor fireplace, a beautiful oil painting of Aunt Hattie. She was wearing her favorite blue dress, sitting in her armchair with that knowing spark in her eyes. The artist had captured her perfectly, not as the frail old woman Darnell chose to see, but as the titan she truly was. "We did it, Arthur," I said softly. "We cleaned house." "You did more than clean house, Keisha," Mr. Henderson said, clinking his glass against mine. "You broke the cycle. You stopped the generational curse of greed and entitlement that had plagued that family for decades. You cut off the rot so something healthy could grow." I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like victory. It tasted like peace. I excused myself and walked to the edge of the terrace, looking down at the long, winding driveway. I remembered driving away from Darnell's rental house 3 months ago with my clothes in the back seat and my heart pounding in my chest. I remembered the fear of starting over. I remembered the sting of his insults. He had told me I was nothing. He had told me I was a placeholder. He had told me he didn't need me because he was rich. He was wrong about everything. He didn't become rich because he lacked the character to sustain wealth. And I wasn't nothing. I was everything he never bothered to understand. I turned back to the party. A young woman, maybe 22 years old, walked up to me. She was holding a notebook and looked nervous. "Ms. Vance," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you. I grew up in a house like yours. My father told me I wasn't smart enough to handle money. He told me I needed a husband to take care of me. But because of this center, because of the scholarship you gave me, I just started my own accounting firm." I smiled and reached out to squeeze her hand. "You don't need anyone to take care of you," I told her. "You have your own mind and your own 2 hands. That is the only inheritance that matters." She beamed at me and walked away, her head held high. I looked back at Hattie's portrait one last time. "Thank you, Auntie," I whispered. "We won." I stood there for a long time, letting the autumn breeze cool my skin. I realized then that the anger was gone. The need for revenge had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. Darnell and his family were not my enemies anymore. They were just lessons. They were the fire that had forged me into steel. The best revenge isn't seeing them in jail, although I admit there is a certain poetic justice to it. The best revenge isn't the money, although financial freedom is a powerful tool. The best revenge is this. It is the joy of building something that lasts. It is the freedom of waking up every morning in a house where no one questions your worth. It is the peace of knowing that you are the author of your own story, and you have finally written the happy ending you deserve. I raised my glass to the sunset, to the city of Atlanta, and to every woman who has ever been told she was less than. Here is to the next chapter. If my story has inspired you to stand up for your worth, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with a friend who might be going through a dark time and remind them that the sun always rises. And let me know in the comments below, what is the biggest obstacle you have overcome on your journey to freedom? I read every single one. Thank you for listening, and remember, your value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth. Stay strong and keep building. This story serves as a powerful reminder that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Darnell believed that sudden wealth defined his value, treating his wife as a disposable accessory. However, true power lies not in arrogance, but in integrity and the quiet resilience to build your own foundation. Keisha proves that when you anchor your worth in your own abilities rather than someone else's validation, you become unbreakable. The ultimate victory wasn't seeing him fall, but rising to walk her own path. The greatest revenge is simply outgrowing those who never deserved you. If you believe in the power of knowing your own worth, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served.